The dining room glowed with the soft light of candles, their flames flickering against the polished wood of my mother's table. Outside, the humid Charleston evening pressed against the windows, carrying the faint scent of salt from the harbor. Plates clinked, laughter rippled across the table, and the low hum of conversation wrapped around me, except none of it seemed to reach my end. Mom moved gracefully between chairs, her hands steady as she placed thick cuts of steak in front of my sister Marigold, her husband Patrick, and their 2 children. She followed with a flourish, producing a box of imported French tarts, each one glossy under the chandelier. They were placed carefully, deliberately, as if arranging jewels. I watched every plate fill, every smile of gratitude, until at last there was nothing left for me but the cool shine of an empty charger. I glanced at my fork and knife, lined neatly, untouched. My roast chicken from the first course had already gone cold. My stomach tightened, but it wasn't hunger. It was something heavier, the weight of a role I had played too long. Across the table, Aunt Meredith's brows knit together. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the clamor. "Claudine, didn't you prepare one for Celine?" Mom's smile was as light as her tone. "I only served for family." The words landed with the softness of silk and the cruelty of glass. A murmur passed around the table, forks pausing mid-air. Marigold smirked, her hand resting comfortably on Patrick's arm as if she had already won something I hadn't known was a contest. Heat flushed my face, my fingers curled under the table, nails pressing into my palm until I steadied them. I lifted my eyes to my mother, then to the sister who had been given everything I was denied. My voice trembled, but it carried. "Am I not family?" The clatter of dishes faded, laughter stilled, and the only sound left was the hum of the chandelier above as the room sank into silence that no one seemed willing to break. It was in that silence that I felt the first thread of resolve begin to pull tight, connecting me back to where it all began. The silence at that dinner table took me back to another kind of silence, the one that filled our house after my father collapsed in the backyard when I was 14. A heart attack, sudden and merciless. One minute he was trimming the hedges, the next he was gone, leaving my mother, my sister, and me adrift in a house that no longer felt steady. In the weeks that followed, bills piled on the counter like storm clouds. Mom's grief turned sharp, practical. "We'll manage," she told me, her voice flat, as if determination alone could stretch a widow's pension to cover everything. And we did manage because I picked up shifts after school at a small bookstore on King Street, while other kids studied for SATs or lingered at football games. I was counting out cash drawers, learning how to balance ledgers, and bringing home grocery money. Goldie, barely 12 then, was spared from all of it. Mom called her the baby, as though the years between us were oceans. Goldie kept her allowance, kept her afternoons free for sketching and painting, while I scrubbed coffee stains from my work polo and prayed the bus wouldn't be late again. By the time I turned 18, I enrolled at Trident Technical College's legal studies program. 2 nights a week, I sat under fluorescent lights, studying tort law and contracts while balancing a full-time job in an accounting office. Goldie, meanwhile, got her acceptance letter to the Savannah College of Art and Design. Mom beamed, saying, "This is what your father would have wanted." She never said that when I showed her my community college ID. Tuition, supplies, rent in Savannah. Mom covered it all for Goldie, writing checks from the account I quietly supplemented with my own wages. Whenever I asked why things had to be so uneven, she'd sigh and rest her hand on mine. "Goldie needs more support. You're stronger. Celine." At the time, I clung to the words like they were praise. Maybe being strong was enough, but sitting at that dinner table years later with an empty plate, I finally began to wonder if strong had only ever been her excuse to give me less. Adulthood didn't change the balance. If anything, it sharpened the edges. Goldie married Patrick in a sprawling wedding on the Battery, the kind of Charleston affair that filled the newspaper's society pages. There were strings quartets, fresh orchids shipped in from Florida, and champagne towers that sparkled under the chandeliers of the old customs house. Mom paid for nearly everything. She said it was tradition, that fathers used to cover the costs, and since ours wasn't there, she would take on the role. I stood at the edge of the photographs in a dress I had bought secondhand and altered myself. My contribution was silent. I slipped out early from work every day that week to help arrange flowers and Fairy Place cards, while my student loan statement sat unopened on my kitchen counter. Mom never asked about those. She only asked if Goldie was rested, if Patrick's family was impressed, if the colors looked right in the reception hall. When the wedding bills cleared, Goldie and Patrick moved into a newly built house in West Ashley, part of a development that advertised luxury coastal living. Mom helped with the down payment. I, meanwhile, stayed in my one-bedroom rental and chipped away at debt with every paycheck. By the time I finally sent in the last loan payment, no one noticed. Holidays followed the same script. Goldie's children opened tablets, bicycles, monogrammed sweaters. Patrick unwrapped a designer watch one Christmas, the kind with Roman numerals etched in gold. I got a scented candle regifted. I realized, when I saw a smudge of someone else's handwriting still faintly on the box. Mom brushed it off when I raised an eyebrow. Goldie has children now. She needs more, she said, as if that justified the imbalance. But more never seemed to stop. Every birthday, every Easter, every 4th of July cookout, it was always Goldie's family at the center, with me orbiting on the outside. I told myself it was fine. That strength meant self-sufficiency. Yet each time I sat quietly while they compared gifts or vacations, a small voice inside asked how long strength was supposed to last without recognition. That voice followed me straight into the next holiday gathering. By the time Goldie's children were old enough to run through the hallways with sticky fingers, Mom had quietly reassigned me from guest to worker at every family gathering. At Thanksgiving, she would press an apron into my hands before I even had a chance to set down my purse. "You're so efficient in the kitchen. Celine. Could you baste the turkey? Make sure the pies don't burn at birthdays." I was handed balloons to tie, chairs to unfold, and Goldie's kids to chase while she and Patrick posed for photos. It wasn't just chores, it was expectation. I was supposed to anticipate needs before anyone asked, to clear plates, pour drinks, hush crying children, all while staying invisible enough not to disrupt the glow around my sister's family. One Christmas, after hours of cooking and wrapping, I sat down last at the tree while the others tore through piles of packages. Goldie gasped as she opened a velvet box from Mom, revealing a delicate bracelet lined with pearls. Patrick grinned, sliding the clasp shut around her wrist. My turn came with a paper bag and a mug inside floral print, chipped along the rim. A faint coffee stain marked the bottom. I remembered seeing the same mug on Mom's counter weeks earlier. Patrick laughed, tilting his glass toward me. "Celine, you should take notes. This is how family looks out for each other." His arm wrapped tightly around Goldie as if the joke were harmless. I forced a smile, but the heat rose in my throat. In that moment, the house didn't feel like the place I grew up, the place where Dad's voice once filled the kitchen on Saturday mornings. It felt like a stage where I had been cast as the servant in a play I hadn't auditioned for. Mom never looked at me with malice. She looked at me with practicality, as if it were natural I should hold the weight so Goldie could shine. "You're strong," she would remind me, but strength, in her mouth, sounded like a command rather than a comfort. That night, as I gathered empty wine glasses and wiped crumbs from the table, I realized that every holiday had turned into proof that strength meant service and service meant silence. But silence only stretches so far before it breaks. The smell of seared steak lingered heavy in the room. mingling with the sweetness of the French tarts as they were unboxed like treasures. Mom's hands moved with the same deliberate grace I'd seen all my life, setting the plates before Goldie, Patrick, their children, and a few cousins who had come down from Colombia. Each plate gleamed with its own perfect cut, juices glistening under the chandelier. The desserts followed, each tart placed carefully beside the steak as though presentation itself were proof of love. When Mom passed by me, her tray suddenly lighter, my place remained bare. The porcelain charger reflected the overhead light, mocking in its emptiness. My roast chicken, carved earlier and long gone cold, sat forgotten at the edge of the table. Aunt Meredith's brow furrowed, her voice breaking the rhythm of chatter. "Claudine, didn't you prepare one for Celine?" Mom turned, her smile soft, airy, as though she'd been caught in nothing at all. "I only served for family." The words slipped out so easily they might have been rehearsed. Around me, silverware paused. Goldie's lips curled into a smirk as she leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Don't be dramatic. Celine, you're fine with chicken." My chest tightened, heat rising like a tide I couldn't hold back. For years, I had swallowed the small humiliations mugs regifted, chores assigned, glances that cut without words. But sitting there, surrounded by laughter and the clink of wine glasses, I felt every slight collapse onto this single moment, sharp and unbearable. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs, steadying the tremor in my hands. My gaze fixed on Mom, who was already turning toward Goldie as if her performance were finished. The air seemed to thicken, a waiting silence pressing at my ribs. For the first time, I didn't lower my eyes. My voice broke the hush, steadier than I felt. "Am I not family?" The table froze. Forks hovered mid-air. Conversations dissolved into stillness. The chandelier hummed faintly above us, the only sound left in the room, while all eyes shifted toward me. The words I had never dared to say were suddenly alive, demanding an answer. No one rushed to fill the silence. Mom's smile wavered, caught between irritation and dismissal. But she didn't answer me. I let the quiet stretch until the weight of it pressed against the walls. My hands stopped trembling. My voice came clearer than I expected. "This isn't about steak or dessert," I said, though the untouched plate in front of me glared like evidence. "This is about the way I've been treated for years, like I don't belong at my own mother's table." A few relatives shifted in their seats. Patrick cleared his throat, but I kept going. Every holiday, every birthday, I'm the one cooking, cleaning, babysitting, while Goldie gets the gifts, the praise, the place at the center. I've been told I'm strong, but that was just another way of saying I didn't deserve care. Mom's lips tightened. "Celine, this isn't the time." When was it ever the time, I asked, leaning forward. "Was it the time you went through my drawers looking for something to criticize? Or when you reminded me I wasn't blood enough to join the lake trip?" Aunt Meredith's eyes flicked to Mom, searching. But Mom looked away. Goldie finally broke in with a laugh sharp enough to slice the air. "God, you sound so jealous. You've always been bitter that Mom gives me more." I turned toward her, steady. "Jealous of what dependence?" Her smile faltered. I didn't stop. "You live off handouts, Mom's money, Patrick's promises, and you think that makes you enviable? I've carried myself without expecting anyone else to foot my bills. I don't envy you." "Goldie, I pity you." Gasps scattered down the table. Goldie's face flushed red. Patrick shifted uncomfortably, and Mom's knuckles whitened against her wine glass. For the first time, the words I had buried for years weren't locked inside me. They were out, burning through the air, and there was no taking them back. Goldie's eyes darted away, but I didn't let the moment slip. "You call me jealous," I said, my voice steady, "but I know the truth about your perfect little family." A murmur passed through the table, Goldie straightened, defensive. What are you talking about? I folded my hands in my lap, though my pulse hammered. I know about the mortgage you're months behind on. I know about the credit cards, maxed out in Patrick's name. And I know Mom has been covering your bills quietly, funneling money so you can keep up appearances. Gasps rippled down the table. Forks clattered. Patrick's face drained of color. Mom's cheeks flushed crimson, her composure cracking. That's not for dinner conversation, she snapped, her voice sharp with panic. I only wanted to protect Goldie's children. They shouldn't suffer because their parents are struggling. I leaned forward, my voice cutting through hers. You've starved one daughter of love to feed the other with lies. You call it protection, but it's favoritism dressed up as sacrifice. Goldie slammed her hand against the table, silverware rattling. You're just bitter you never had a family of your own. No husband, no children. That's why you're so eager to tear mine apart. The sting was real, but it didn't land the way she wanted. I met her glare. Calm. Better no family than a cage built from shame. Her jaw dropped. Words caught in her throat. Around us. The room quivered in silence. The spell of superiority that had long shielded her cracking under the weight of exposed truth. Claudine clutched her napkin, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Patrick stared at his plate as though answers might be carved into the china. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking at the table. I was the one forcing everyone else to see what had been hiding in plain sight, and that shift left the air sharp, charged, impossible to ignore as I prepared to take my stand. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against wood cutting through the suffocating quiet. My napkin fell to the floor, a small white flag I had no intention of picking up. Slowly, I reached for my bag, sliding the strap over my shoulder as if I were simply excusing myself from an ordinary dinner. But nothing about this moment was ordinary. I'm done, I said, my voice low but firm. I've been half a daughter my entire life, and I won't play that part anymore. Goldie let out a sharp laugh, the sound brittle. Oh, please, you're being dramatic again. Before I could reply, Aunt Meredith rose from her chair. Her presence was quiet but commanding, her eyes fixed on Mom. Claudine, this was cruel. You humiliated her in front of all of us. The room shifted. A few cousins exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding, their silence finally breaking into murmurs of agreement. The weight of their support settled on me like a cloak I hadn't realized I was allowed to wear. Mom sat frozen, her stare pinned to me as though willing me to back down. Goldie sneered, her lip curling, but it only made her look smaller. I straightened, lifting my chin. If I'm not family, then stop expecting me to play the role you've written for me. You can't have it both ways, not anymore. The words hung heavy in the air. No one moved to stop me as I stepped away from the table. The echo of my heels clicked against the hardwood floor, sharp and final. Behind me, chairs creaked, silverware trembled, but no voice called me back. I walked through the archway into the hall, past the framed photos where Goldie smiled from every corner, and I stood blurred at the edges. The front door loomed ahead, its brass handle warm beneath my palm. As I pulled it open, the humid Charleston night rushed in, carrying me out into the dark where my own silence finally belonged to me. In the days that followed, the phone calls began. At first, I let them ring unanswered, the sound too tightly wound to my raw nerves. But eventually, I picked up. One cousin, her voice hushed, said she admired me for saying what everyone else had noticed but never dared to name. Another apologized for sitting silent while Mom drew the line in front of me. Their words didn't erase the sting of that night, but they softened the edges. Aunt Meredith called on Saturday, steady as always. Come to my place for Sunday dinner, she said. Family is who respects you at the table, not who denies you a plate. Her words settled in me like an anchor, something sure in the shifting tide. Mom's message came later, short and cold. You embarrassed me. Don't expect an apology. It carried the same clipped tone she used when bills were late after Dad died, the tone that meant nothing would move her. Goldie, predictably, took to social media. Her post about jealous siblings drew sympathetic comments from her friends, a carefully staged photo of her children in matching outfits attached. I scrolled past it without pause. She could keep her stage. I had stepped off mine. At night, when the house was quiet, I replayed the dinner in my mind, the clatter of my chair, Aunt Meredith's voice, the hush that followed my words. For years I'd feared speaking would break me. Instead, it had broken something else, the illusion that silence was survival. I began to realize that shame no longer sat with me. It sat with those who had stayed quiet while I was erased, and it was theirs to carry now. Within a month, I signed the lease on a narrow brick townhouse tucked into Charleston's historic district, just a few streets from the harbor. The windows overlooked the cobblestones, and at night I could hear the ship's horns drifting across the water. It wasn't grand, but it was mine walls that held no expectations, no old photographs of me half hidden at the edges. The first dinner I hosted there was simple roasted chicken, fresh bread from the corner bakery, wine poured into mismatched glasses I'd collected over the years. Aunt Meredith arrived first, carrying peach cobbler still warm from her oven. Soon after, a few cousins came in, their laughter filling the narrow stairwell as they carried trays and bowls. By the time we sat down, the table was crowded with food and conversation, each chair taken, every plate full. I looked around at their faces that hadn't looked away the night I stood against my mother. They passed the bread, clinked glasses, and asked me about my work, my plans, my dreams. No one demanded I prove my worth. No one called me dramatic for asking to be seen. As I refilled Aunt Meredith's glass, the words formed quietly in my chest. Family isn't the ones who eat steak while you sit hungry. It's the ones who make room at the table. The memory of Mom's house, the gleaming plates, the cold stares, the silence that swallowed me whole no longer ached the way it once did. That silence hadn't been rejection. It had been liberation. The sound of a door finally closing so I could walk through another. In the end, what makes you family, the blood that excludes you, or the love that refuses to leave you hungry?